We're going to go ahead and get started, folks. Good afternoon and welcome to the public portion of our Disrupting Poverty Conference. I'm so happy to see you all here. My name is Nikki Ruiz-Lizarriaga. I'm the Vice President for Institutional Advancement at EMPath. And I just have to say we're so happy to see you all at our first in-person conference since 2018. It's been an eventful 4 years, to say the least, but it is so nice to finally be able to connect in person like this. And you guys have really come from everywhere. We have 30 states and 5 countries represented in this room right now, which is just amazing. Thank you for making the trip. So where's my West Coast folks at? West Coast? Woo! All right. Where's my international folks at? Where are you guys? Where's our Dutch contingent? They're there. All right. Anyway, we are just so happy to welcome some leading voices in what works to our conference today and for the next 3 days. We are just coming out of an amazing day and a half of members-only content. And so you'll see lots of folks in the room that have the green ribbons that say that they are members of our exchange. And we've just had a wonderful day and a half of deep dives into what really works programmatically. And now we're going to kind of zoom out and look at some broader topics today and for the coming days as well. We're going to cover a range of important and timely topics such as cash supports, social networks, workforce development, early childhood and 2-gen programs, housing, and more. We're really excited to have experts here in every sense of the word. So yes, we have academics and we have federal policymakers, but we also have people working directly with impacted families, folks who are making things happen at the local level, and people who have been directly impacted by the systems that we are all trying so hard to improve. So just a few logistical things before we get really kicked off. The Wi-Fi info is up on a slide. It will be on a slide. There it is. So there's the Wi-Fi info if you need it. Please download the Whova Conference app. The app is really where you will find everything that you need to know, your agenda, your speaker bios, evaluations for each session. You can do your evaluations as you go by clicking on the agenda, clicking on each session, and then clicking rate. So there's just a very simple rating and feedback that you can give on each session. We'd love it if you would just do that as we go through the conference. And then there'll be an overall conference evaluation at the end. We are going to be coming back in spring of 2024 with this conference, and so we would love any input you have about who else should be in this room, who else you would love to hear from for that next conference. Throughout the conference, we're going to have Q&A at the end of each session. If you're shy, you can ask a question through that Whova app by going into the conference session itself and then clicking on Q&A. And we'll have somebody to read your question out loud. And if you want to ask a question live, you can raise your hand. Somebody will come around the mic. Please wait for the mic. We are streaming some of these sessions virtually, and so we need you to speak into the mic in order to get you. And please, I beg you, get right to your question if you have a question. We've all been at conferences. We all know what I'm talking about. Some people hog the mic. Please don't do that. We have instructed moderators to cut folks off and ask them to get to the question if it's going a little long. So thank you for cooperating there. Now, one of the things that sets an in-person conference apart from what we've been doing for the last few years, which is sitting on Zoom together, is the opportunity to really engage, to really connect with other human beings. And so I know that we're all sort of like rediscovering how to do this, and it's a little awkward and hard. And so we've set up a few things to try to help. You'll see on your tables there's a sheet with some questions to help you dive a little bit deeper, get beyond the small talk, right? And so when we have breaks or during lunch sessions or what have you, please, feel free to, go out there, introduce yourself to somebody else, and ask some of these fun questions to folks. And then tomorrow, another kind of like networking connector activity that we'll have is Lunch and Learns. And so you'll see over there, folks have already started to put up some session topics. If you have a session topic that you would like to do, and don't worry, this isn't like formal, you don't have to like give a presentation or anything, it's just like a table of people who all want to talk about the same thing. And so if you have an idea of something that you would love to jump into with folks, put it over there on a big piece of paper. Other folks can put their names on and sign up for that lunch and learn. And if you don't have an idea of your own, just put your name on one of those papers. And then finally, you can also connect with your fellow conference goers in the app, both one-on-one. You can send folks messages if there's somebody that you really want to meet. Or you can suggest a meetup, at another time if you're like, oh, I'm going to go to downtown Boston tonight. Who wants to come? Whatever it is. So feel free to use the app for that as well. Really want folks to try to get out from behind their screens and here engaging with each other. So okay, a few other logistical things before we get started. You'll see our photographer, Shannon. There she is. She blends in. But she's going to be taking photos throughout the 3 days that we're here together. We're going to assume that if you're here, you are consenting to have your photo taken. If you do not want your photo taken, please tell us, tell Shannon. We are very happy to not take your photo as well. But we're just going to assume everybody's okay with it unless you tell us otherwise. We are here together in this room for the rest of today. You can please feel free to get up, get food, get drinks, get coffee whenever you need to. There's a bathroom around the corner to the right, but we will also have a couple of breaks in between sessions today. And finally, if at any point you need help, if you have questions, anything like that, just look for somebody with one of these blue staff ribbons, and they should be able to help you, or they can find somebody who can. Okay, so now let's get to the good stuff. I am so excited to introduce to you our first speaker who's going to get us kicked off. Kim Janey is the president and CEO of Economic Mobility Pathways, or EMPath for short. EMPath is a nonprofit organization based here in Boston, dedicated to helping families living in poverty to dramatically improve their economic mobility. EMPath offers a unique combination of direct services, a learning network of human services organizations, the Exchange, and research and advocacy for what works. This virtuous circle allows each part of our organization's work to inform what we do, what we share, and what we know about what works to move others forward and really seed systemic change. So Kim Janey made history when she was sworn in as Boston's first woman and first Black mayor, successfully, yes. Successfully leading the city through a multitude of unprecedented challenges, including the COVID-19 global pandemic. She began her tenure with a citywide agenda of recovery, reopening, and renewal to address systemic inequities exposed and exacerbated by the pandemic. She invested millions to support small businesses and expanded protections for renters and homeowners, and she launched fare-free public transit. Prior to becoming, yes, thank you. Prior to becoming mayor, she made history in 2017 when she was elected to the Boston City Council as the first woman to represent District 7. And in 2020, she was elected by her peers to serve as the president of the most diverse city council in Boston's history. Devoting her life to public service, she has 25 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, championing systemic policy changes to increase equity, excellence, access, and an opportunity in Boston public schools, and advocating for affordable, quality child care. Most recently, she served as a resident fellow at the Institute of Politics at Harvard's Kennedy School, and as an inaugural fellow at the Barry Institute of Politics at Salem State University. A proud fourth-generation Roxbury resident, that's a neighborhood in Boston for those of you who are not from here. She comes from a long line of educators, entrepreneurs, artists, and advocates. She was raised with values that guide her to this day: the importance of education, the power of community organizing, and the fundamental principles of equity and justice. Please help me give a warm welcome to EMPath's president, Kim Janey.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think you can do better than that. We need some energy in the room. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, that's better. Well, welcome again to the 2022 Disrupting Poverty Conference. And look around, look at this room. Look at this room of change makers, of disruptors. Look at all of the folks who are in this fight with us together. Look around, look. Yes, give yourselves a round of applause. You know, as Nikki said, this is our first in-person conference since 2018, and I want to thank you all for taking the time to be here. I know you all have very busy schedules, all of us in this work do, and that you're doing very important work in your home communities. So thank you for taking the time to be with us. It is so helpful to get away from our daily churn and to spend some time learning from each other. We're all here today because we reject the dominant narrative that is used implicitly and explicitly throughout our systems. This is a narrative that tells us that some people don't matter and that some do. That some people have potential, but others don't. That some people deserve opportunity and yet others don't. Our systems were set up with these assumptions in place, but we are all working together in our own ways to create a different reality, a different future. That's part of what disrupting is all about, disrupting old narratives. I know a little bit about these narratives because I've lived with them. Before I was president of this organization, long before, like 40 years ago, I was a participant. In high school, I had become pregnant, and many of the adults around me treated me like my life was over. That is the power of narrative. When people saw me, they saw a 16-year-old black girl who was pregnant, living in poverty, and they assumed that they knew what I would become. They thought I should forget about my dreams, forget about my goals, and just accept my fate. But I found this organization, EMPath, that I now lead, and I found people who cared. They refused to accept that narrative. They encouraged me to remember my dreams and to work toward my goals. With their support, I finished high school on time with my peers, with my 18-month-old daughter by my side. My first experience with inequality was much earlier, though, as a child during the busing era here in Boston. For those of you who are not familiar, in the 1970s, Boston was under a court order to desegregate our public schools. It was a very tumultuous and traumatizing time in our city. And at just 11 years old, I was bused to a school in Charlestown. This was a predominantly white school in a predominantly white neighborhood of Boston, where I was greeted with rocks and racial slurs. I had been a straight-A student up until that time, but that year, my teacher told me that he didn't care if I learned because he would still get paid. That was an early lesson on how it feels when those in power do not care. These experiences and others led me to a career in community organizing and activism on behalf of children and families in Boston and all across our nation. First in early childhood education, and then for public schools, K through 12 here in Boston. And I saw firsthand how our systems, how they fail black and brown children. I saw it as a student, I saw it as a young single mom, and I saw it again as an advocate. This ultimately led me to politics, culminating in becoming the mayor of Boston, the first woman and the first person of color to lead our great city. My trajectory didn't end up being what most people assumed it would be. When people saw that scared black girl being bused to a white school, or that pregnant teen, they had written me off. They thought they knew what I would become, but they didn't. Reflecting back on it, I realized that my daughter awakened something in me when she was born. Like many parents, I felt a strong drive to give my daughter the very best that life had to offer. I knew I wanted to work to create more opportunity, not just for her, but for all children. And I benefited greatly from many amazing mentors. And one of my first and strongest mentors was Lisa Sullivan, an adjunct professor at a community college that I attended when I was about 24. Lisa saw something in me that I hadn't yet seen in myself, and she encouraged me to attend conferences just like this one, She encouraged me to become more involved in student activism and ultimately to transfer to Smith, an elite liberal arts college that I hadn't even heard of at that time. I'm also the product of an entire lineage of my family before me who were educators, artists, entrepreneurs, and activists. From the abolitionist, my great-great-great-grandfather, Esau Janey, who in the 1850s was head of the Abolition Society and did important work, all the way up into my parents, who were active in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And I wanted to start this conference off by sharing a little bit about my background, because when people talk about poverty and these kinds of environments at conferences, it can be very easy to slip into talking about them. Those folks over there, those people. And part of disrupting the narrative is making sure that we don't do that at this conference and that we don't do that in our work. And the reality is, I am them. I am them. When I was growing up here, there were a number of times that we didn't have an apartment, a place to stay, and we had to live with aunts or my great-grandmother who had a beautiful brownstone in the South End. We even briefly stayed in a shelter. And I know the stress that that can cause on a family and that kind of impact. I can still remember how it felt when I got my Section 8 voucher. It felt like I had hit the lottery. Having that kind of security was an absolute game changer. It allowed me to free up my mind to take on new challenges, to set new goals. I also know what it feels like when people make assumptions about you, who have no care about your specific history or experience, and they just lump you in with the amorphous them, whose problems need to be solved. People are not cases that need to be managed or problems that need to be solved. Like me, every individual deserves to have an organization who understands them and their history and appreciates them and what they bring to the table, their own motivations, their own strengths, and their own potential. It's up to all of us to help them realize that potential. That is what this business of disrupting poverty is all about. As providers and practitioners, we are not here to act as saviors. I'm going to say that again. We are not here to act as saviors. Instead, we can provide support while treating the people we are working with, participants. We can work with them and treat them with dignity and with respect. It's also important to remember that while talent may be evenly distributed, opportunity is not. Who knows what that child living in a homeless shelter in Brighton could grow up to become, or that young single mom, what potential that they have. For all we know, we could grow up to cure cancer or even become mayor. So I invite you to dig in during this conference. Let's not be content with the old way of doing things. This is not about getting back to normal, getting back to pre-pandemic times, because we know that that normal was killing people, was hurting people. We have the opportunity to make sure that we are doing better. The status quo will not do. We can build something new, and we can do that work together. So let's have the hard conversations about what actually works and what doesn't in helping move people out of poverty. Let's be bold in our thinking about the way things could be if we all work together. Let's build systems that put families at the center, that promote true economic mobility, that starts with deep respect. Let's create a world where everyone experiencing poverty gets the kind of support that they actually need to move forward, the kind of support that they deserve. Let's take these next few days to ask questions, to connect, to re-energize, to engage, and to emerge truly ready to take on these challenges, to disrupt old narratives, to disrupt poverty, to do this work together. Thank you so much for being part of this movement, for caring enough to be here, and for all of the work that you are doing every single day in your home communities to disrupt poverty. Thank you so much.